So on the week of recording this video, we heard that Andy Murray was thinking or contemplating about retiring from tennis. Now there's a bit of ambiguity there because he may still be able to continue. However, if he does, he's near the end of his career anyway. But it has important implications for how you bet and trade on just about every sport that you can imagine. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. If you're interested in learning to trade on Betfair, then visit the BetAngel Academy, where you have detailed, structured Betfair trading courses. Or why not visit our website where you can download a free trial of BetAngel Professional, but also visit the forum where you can get detailed images, examples, and downloadable files. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon if you want notification of new videos as they're released. So yeah, Murray decided on the week that I recorded this video that he was going to come out and basically say, well, you know what, that's pretty much it for me. And he's going to try and struggle on for a bit, maybe get to Wimbledon, but then he has to make a decision about whether he ends it there or whether he goes for some quite risky surgery, and then he could possibly come back, but the surgery could go wrong, or, you know, there are many ways of going there, but he basically figured out that this was pretty much going to be it as far as he was concerned. But I have to say it wasn't a massive surprise, because when you look at tennis players, they follow a fairly defined path. Now, just over 10 years ago, I actually wrote an article about this, but around the same time, I did a series of interviews on radio and on TV, and one of the funny things about doing interviews is, you know, as you know, if you've watched enough of my videos, I will reiterate and remind you many times that when you're betting or trading, there's no definite yes or no answer to anything. However, whenever you do an interview, everybody wants to know and have a definite answer. I remember doing one on the Grand National where I was talking about trading, or trying to talk about trading, and they put me up against a clairvoyant, and they were basically saying, right, who's going to win then? And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Who are you backing for Saturday's main race, first of all?
Well, typically, you don't have to back just one horse. You can use a technique called Dutching, which means you can actually back more than one horse and decide how much you want to win or lose on part of the field. So I'll probably back 3 or 4 on Saturday. All right,
let's bring Dean in at this point. Dean, Midas Touch Maynard. Do you agree with that way of doing things, Dean? Welcome to the programme, by the way.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I mean, I always get asked for about 4 or 5 horses, rather than obviously just putting all of your fate in one. So I agree with Peter on that. But obviously my techniques will probably slightly differ from Peter's.
In what way? You lick your finger, put it up and see which way the wind's blowing, kind of thing?
No, I will have a look at the horses which catch by name, by sort of destiny. I mean, one of my main horses has actually been chosen by the fact of occurrences. The jockey rode the Gold Cup winner, right, and is very good friends with Kate Middleton, and obviously we've got a royal wedding coming up. So maybe there's a little bit of fate there.
And it's funny because you always get pushed down that route. However, on one of the interviews that I did over 10 years ago, I was asked, will Andy Murray ever win Wimbledon? And I was actually able to give an answer to that, you know. And I said to them, you know, there's a good likelihood that he would, and if he is going to win it, it's going to be in this year.
Murray's chances then, what do you think?
I think he's done very well, because obviously in the Australian Open at the beginning of the year, he had an excellent run. And obviously there was an advantage that he had against Nadal there in terms of Nadal retired. But I think that he's actually done very well, because he's gone through a very small dip in form, but he's recovered well at Wimbledon. He's the only guy at the moment who hasn't dropped a set. And when you look at the way that Federer and Nadal have struggled on occasion, then I think it's a very good chance.
And guess what happened? He won it in that year. So how was I able to predict that, and how does that segue to what we've been talking about with Andy Murray and his career? Well, when you look at people's careers, they all follow a defined path. So when I wrote the article that I wrote, I think it was 10 years ago, may have been slightly more than 10 years ago, what I actually did is I went through all of the tennis players that were currently on the circuit and all of the ones that had been before. I went back through the history of every single tennis player and started to try and define a path for their career. You know, when did they start, when did they retire, and where was their peak? And the reason for doing that was to basically get in front of all of the what was going to happen in their career. So, a tennis player is unbeatable at some point within their career, or, at the top of their ability, because obviously there are different levels of players. But then eventually they go into decline. So what I was trying to do is anticipate that decline, get in front of the market, start betting on their opponent when they were at very, very short odds, with the anticipation that they were starting that decline. So I plotted all of the data, and then came up with an article on it, which was published in a magazine. Can't quite remember off the top of my head which magazine it is, but I'll see if I can get up a screenshot for you to show that did happen. But the reason for doing that was to, I'd figured out that every sports person, every animal has that sort of path. So what you tend to find is that horses, for example, they go out as 2-year-olds, flat horses I'm talking about here specifically, and then they reach a peak and then they start to go into decline. So horses peak at about 4.5 years old, typically. A bit longer if you're on the jumps. And then obviously horses can hang around for ages because they can run in handicaps from that point onwards. But if you look at footballers, tennis players, golf players, cricket players, they all have definable characteristics. Some are different from others. So for example, you look at a football team, the striker is going to be more injury prone, and he's going to lose his speed before the goalkeeper, who probably doesn't get involved in that many tackles and sits on his goal line for a big chunk of the match. So subtle differences on each individual sport. But I was primarily interested in tennis and the career of a tennis player, to understand where they are. How great to be able to lay or trade something at 101, because you realise that they're on the edge of their decline, or that they are headed down that path. And it may be a shock to some people, but if you're looking for those opportunities, you will probably find them. So yeah, I analysed the entire career of thousands of players, and what you tend to find is tennis players turn pro about 17, 18. So if you haven't got ability when you're in your teens, then you're never going to make it as a pro. You have to be picked up, found, nurtured, matured, and then you'll turn pro at 17, 18. Now, generally there's a rapid rise there because you gain experience really quickly, and physiologically you're going towards your peak. So that initial part of the career rockets upwards, and then you reach this age where it all starts to go into decline. Now for you and I, the sad thing is that age is 25. Once you're past 25, you're past your physical peak and things start to go into reverse. I'm sure if you're double that age, you will understand where I'm coming from, because things just start to go wrong and you begin to lose your ability to do a number of things. Your muscles get a bit stiffer, you can't reach as far. Your back, you see all of those ailments. So yeah, that's 25, remarkably. You go up, you reach that peak at 25, and then you start this decline physiologically. So tennis players' careers goes from 17 to 18. They're at their peak in their mid-20s, because it can be a little bit earlier, a bit later, depending upon many factors. And then by the time they're in their early 30s, they're seriously thinking about retiring. And by the time they're in their mid-30s, they have retired. Now, you look at Roger Federer, pretty amazing to see him still out there playing on the court. But of course, his peak is much higher. It sort of goes right off the top of the screen here, and then comes back down or is coming down the other side, whereas other players are going like this, and they will come down to meet him at some point. So there are different levels at which ability goes as well, but nonetheless you can't escape that curve. So even if Andy Murray goes and has surgery and has his hip repaired, he will then be older still when he returns. He's going to have to take a fair chunk of time out, could return next year, may not return, and then he'll be approaching his mid-30s. He'll be 10 years past his peak, and there'll be younger players scampering around the court, reaching balls that he can't reach, getting to them faster, and your career's gone. So yeah, you have that little period of time. It's actually enshrined in law, because you can take a pension earlier if you're a sports person, because you're expected to have a short career. You can't keep playing tennis in Grand Slams when you're 65. That's not going to happen. So yeah, in law, you can actually take a pension if you're a sports person at a much earlier age, because you would have used up all of your ability in those years that you were performing at the highest level. So when you look at Murray, he's 31, he's past that period. The thing to note about this curve, and I will bring up the curve on the screen behind me now, is that when the curve starts, you get this rapid rise, and then it sort of shallows out when we sort of reach the top, when it's at its peak. But the curve down is a little bit more gentle, and that is because you have experience. You know, you're serving for match point in a major Grand Slam somewhere to get through to the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, or reach some achievement. When you first achieve that as a youngster, you probably may not be able to pull that off. But with experience, with age comes experience, and you know, therefore you can use all sorts of tricks, psychological, or managing the game a bit better, or just coping with those moments a bit better, and therefore the tail off is a little bit more shallow. So yeah, rapid rise, a peak period of around 3 years when you're most likely to get your best results, and then it starts to decline from there. So when we look at the curve now, you know, Murray is on the far side of the declining curve and headed for retirement, whether he had an injury or not. But you also notice when you're watching tennis that players pick up injuries. It's much more likely when they're past their peak. On the way up, I mean, I'm sure you may have experienced this as well, you feel invincible. And when I used to run regularly, I used to have a little twinge and I just used to run it off. But when you sort of get into your 30s, it doesn't seem to be possible. And you tend to do yourself more damage, and then it takes longer to repair as well. So even if you don't pick up that they're on the decline, the number of injuries they're going to get are going to be higher, and those injuries could occur during a match, during a tournament. And there are other little things that you can do that can pick up on that. But also visit, there are plenty of websites out there that list the injuries of tennis players, and you can start to build up a pattern to see if they're getting recurring injuries, if it's the same item, and whether they're going to have to go and get themselves sorted out. So, you know, a good example of this is Del Potro. Del Potro's suffered significantly from injury, and he's made a comeback, and then he's suffered a problem. He's had to take time out of the game to repair his ranking drops, and then he has to build himself back up. And you know, so players typically follow this sort of pattern. So yeah, you know, the way to analyse this and to look at this, look at the age of players, look at where they are in their career, look at the number of injuries that they've got, and what it allows you to do is to skip in front of the activity within the market and anticipate when you get shock results or situations don't develop the way that you expect them to. But also it will focus you in on those players that are obviously struggling and give you a sense of when they're, and it could be within the dynamics of a team or an individual sport or something. It would just give you that little heads up in front of everybody else in terms of when to expect those sort of shock results or slightly worse performances. So yeah, I did loads of data on it. I've narrowed it down to very fine detail and things to look for. But as a broad overview, there's a good idea for you to understand how to roll it into a format like tennis. So, you know, the best chance of a younger player defeating an older player is to try and crush them in that first set. If they can get that break, they may be able to win the set. And if they can just push that player out on court for a little bit longer, their physical ability may be able to overcome the experience on the other side of the net. So there are many ways in which you can deploy this sort of knowledge. Anyhow, that was something I did best part of 10 years ago, but it still bears relevance today, especially with the impending retirement of Andy Murray.